So I think with the like entrepreneurial mindset, you see that in the Proverbs 31 woman. And I'm not saying that every single woman needs to be an entrepreneur, but usually when you think of an entrepreneur or a business person, you think of a man. So I think that's interesting to consider. But outside, you know, I would hope that someone would warn me if I were at a gas station. I wouldn't care so much if a woman approached me, but whenever I pump gas, I'm looking around the whole time. I'm trying to see if there's somebody coming at me. If it's a man, I'm going to be much more alert than if it's a woman. Yeah. And I think that ties into the conversation. Even if the person looks like a man or looks like a woman, my perception of them is going to determine how I respond to that. But yeah, I don't really have examples of that either, besides it's something to think about. I might need a week.
No, and like I said, it's something that I'm still challenged with and still trying to think through myself. So I was curious of the opinions of other people. But like I said, I think just some basic ones are, you know, protecting, you know, and providing. And I do think, you know, even in courtship, that's really huge. And again, I don't know if I can prove this scripturally, but I think it is both parties' responsibility, but primarily the man, to try to protect the purity of the woman that he is courting. And so, especially within Christian circles, like there's a huge emphasis on purity, a huge emphasis on like fleeing temptation and doing these things. And coming out of that Christian, you know, bubble, I feel like a lot of the conversations on purity are mainly directed towards men. You know, men struggling with whatever their struggle is. But as I've gone through life, even having conversations with Mylena, I feel like it's equally as a struggle for women as well, you know, and it's something that, you know, we kind of ignore. But if you probably were to look at the statistics, they're probably just as high with men, whether it be pornography, whether it be whatever the case may be, that is just as high. And so why, I guess number one, why do you think it's such a conversation when we talk about lust, it's geared mainly towards men? And I guess in my experience, women aren't given the same amount of attention when we talk about this topic of lust.
A good question.
Who wants to go first?
I was just trying to think, like, you know, society's different views of, like, you know, a man who's promiscuous versus a woman, like what she's called and, you know, what he's called. Like, he's a player. I'm just going to put it out there. She's a slut or whatever. So I was wondering if the two are kind of related. Like, you know, like guys, it's because like it's like a natural thing. Like they're going to want, you know, all these women, like it's okay, like they're the ones that are going to be lusting. The women, you know, they shouldn't be, because there's such a negative stipulation on her being promiscuous. Like it's just like shut off. Like that's not even an option for you. Maybe, I don't know.
I think it has a lot to do with patriarchy, honestly, because if you have always, like, from America's beginning, right? So America's been a messy place since day one, still waiting for it to be great. Anyway, so you see like women portrayed as this meek and mild, which is what, you know, it's wonderful. Those are great qualities, but like we have the absence of a libido, right? That's not true. The Lord also gave women a libido. He also gave them a voice and a backbone and ideas. And for a long time in Western culture, it's been shut down, where, you know, it took a new law. Like it took women's suffrage for women to be able to work. That wasn't a thing for men. It was never men's suffrage. It was something particular to women. And even now you have issues where men and women are doing the same jobs, but men are being paid more for them. So where men are seen as strong for promiscuity, women are seen as trash for promiscuity. And I do think that's flipping around a little bit, because you see a lot of some celebrities, even like they look powerful. Like these women look powerful. They look sexy with their promiscuity, but it's still not. Like, it's still brokenness. It's still setting us up for failure ultimately, because our minds are so set on our sex lives that we ignore what God created it to be. So, like, heterosexuality, homosexuality, transgender, these are all things that need to be talked about in a loving way, but none of them are the focus. None of them should be the focus. If you're a Christian, it doesn't matter if you identify with any of those categories, because God loves you no matter what. So if that's the argument, like, our focus should be purely on him, which is why I think it goes back to the original question about marriage and singleness and relationships. It's not about marriage and singleness. Those are constructs for a relationship, which God has designed for us to have with him in unity. So...
No, and like I said, I appreciate that, and to try to ignore the conversation, I think is a disservice, because it is something that does need to be talked about, and I think that's possibly one of the things that me and like Mylena clicked on, where we could be open about our own struggles with each other, because it's something, especially as a man, that you think it's just the guys who are talking about sex and have that on their mind, but it's like something that goes on with women, and I think, I'm gonna be honest, I think women mature at a higher rate than men, so I feel like they're talking about it, more than us as guys do. And I feel like sometimes, again, going back to double standards, where they work in both reverses, where I think sometimes we neglect women in those areas because we think, again, we have that idea, like, it's so prude,
Right.
to think that a woman is thinking these things, that we don't take proper time to minister to the woman as well in those areas when it comes to lust. But
can I speak to that again?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I think it's important for, like, our brothers to know, when we get into groups of just women, especially if we're talking about like hard topics, we talk about our issues with that. We talk about our lust. We talk about our addictions to porn. We talk about our addictions to Netflix and how it's really difficult because you just thought the show looked interesting and you clicked play and then you couldn't look away because it was just fascinating, right? Like, even the shows like Scandal or Game of Thrones or any of these shows that, they are interesting. They have interesting plots. They're well done. The production is awesome. The music is good. It's right there. It'll just play the next episode without you having to do anything. That's what we talk about in our circles together. And we talk about other stuff as well. Like, of course, we talk about, clothes if we're interested in clothes. But our focus, and you can correct me if you think this is different, but I would say we spend most of our time talking about relationships. So... brothers, help us out. Pray for us. Be careful not to ask us detailed questions in small groups. But, like, it's something I think in a group setting, I think is a beautiful thing to discuss. But I wouldn't have that conversation one-on-one with a girl, because then she's going to be like, oh my God, what's happening? And also you want to protect both of your hearts in that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I just had a couple more things before we wrapped up. So both of you guys have been in relationships, are currently in relationships. And like I said, the title of the podcast is You're Doing It Wrong. And just wanted to be open and honest about the relationships you've been in and either something that you've done wrong and learned from. I'm trying to think. I wanted to set start it off real quick. One of the things with me and Mylena that I've done and still have been guilty of is she always makes this comparison when we were, I guess, courting or dating, just being very intentional. And I think especially during those times of courting, we let the person see us at our best. We want to put our best foot forward, and that was definitely the case. And then once you get married, I've just been guilty of just being very lax in that and not being as attentive, taking her for granted, and it's something that I still constantly struggle with. So I want to say that I've learned from it, but I think that's the trap that you fall into, especially when you are courting, and eventually the person will get to see you on your bad days. But it's different when you waking up day in and day out to the next person. You truly get to see them, the highs and the lows. So that's definitely something that I have done wrong in relationship, where I've always desired, even before I was a Christian, just being a husband and a father. Those are things that I've always desired, and And I think God is going to hold me accountable more for those things than, you know, any amount of degrees or ministry related work that I do, because I think my first ministry and priority is to my family, and sometimes it's easy to take for granted those who are closest to you. So that's definitely something that I've done wrong, and I'm trying to learn from. But what about you guys?
I'll go.
Okay.
So I would say in my past relationships, I've had a hard time figuring out what girlfriend is supposed to be like. I understand singleness and I understand friends and I understand like the models of marriage that I've seen, but I don't understand girlfriend. So, and I think that's still something that I have to process. And again, right now it's not an issue, but like trying to assume that my boyfriend or counterpart will, you know, lead me in a certain way that I've seen husbands lead their wives, but it's not happening. Like, it might not be appropriate for him to do that, but I just can't compute it. Like, I just don't get it. It's a big gray area for me, and it's kind of scary. So even in my next relationship, you know, fair warning here, but it will be something I have a lot of questions about. So, you know, in those past relationships, they tanked, right? And I think part of it was probably because I had these unfair expectations, and even didn't communicate them. It was just like they were there, but hidden away. And I would say, again, with the communication part, there have been times where I've been asked, "What's wrong?" And I'm like, "Nothing." "What's wrong? I can tell you're upset." "Nothing's wrong." 3 hours later, and I'm like, "You were supposed to know what it was." Now I'm much more direct. "What's wrong?" "Oh, I'll tell you what's wrong."
That's Tova cut her eyes at Keith.
Yeah, it's real, but yeah, those two things.
What about you?
It's funny. I do that. I'm not gonna lie.
He keeps shaking his head over there.
It's hard not to do it.
Yeah. I would say one thing I did in my past relationships, which I think I've gotten over it, or at least I have a different perspective about it now. Checkboxing. So like, you know, like the last relationship I was in before this one thing I was like, okay, he's a Christian. Check. But then it's like everything else, like, I guess I was kind of ignoring. I don't know how to best put it. The long story short is there was a compatibility issue, and I was still stuck on, well, he's a Christian, he'll change, like I will change him, this will work. But it was like I was seeing a lot of red flags, and, you know, I would pray on them. I'd be like, God, you know, like, should I be paying attention to this? Or like, you know, if it's not really a big issue, like, you know, let the red flags like go away. And they didn't go away. And it basically got to the point that, you know, God was trying to show me you don't need to be in this relationship, and then like he just shut the door. So
He's good like that, right?
Yeah, he is. So and that's not the first time that's happened. I've been in other relationships too where it just gets to that point where it's like God's like, you don't need to be in this relationship, and then he just shuts the door. So I'm thankful for that. And, you know, now I'm looking like for other things, like how Keith and I are able to get through conflict. Because, you know, one thing with my parents, like, yeah, they would have, you know, arguments and everything, but I didn't really see how that conflict resolution worked, which probably, you know, me being a child, that's not really for me to see. But, you know, when it came down to, you know, Keith and I having our first fights, like, I thought it was like no man's land. Like, you don't fight, you don't argue, like, that's a bad thing. That's a bad sign in your relationship. And so after talking with other couples, I realized like that is actually okay, and what's healthy is how you get past the fight. So
no, but I really appreciate you guys sharing. Number one, just being willing and open to have a candid conversation like that, because like I said, it's you're being vulnerable. You know, you're just opening yourself and just having real conflicts, because you're still, waiting for engagement. You're still waiting. So these are things that you're currently fighting and dealing with. And even someone who is married, it's like, I think we believe once we get married, like everything like ceases. Like all the issues that we had before, and I truly believe it just gets magnified, because you're truly going to be in a relationship where you have to love someone as Christ loved. And that's why I wanted to ask that initial question, like, why is this topic of relationship so important? Because if you don't come from this biblical basis, it's like as soon as someone does something, oops, I'm out of here. Mm-hmm. But if your foundation is God's love for you, and you realize all the things that you've done, and he's saying, I'm not going anywhere, that's how you reflect what Christ's relationship with the church. That, going back to what you said when you had quoted me, where I said marriage is not about your happiness, it's about your holiness. I'm not saying that you're not going to be happy,
right?
But you're not going to be happy 24/7. In those moments when you are angry, and it's going to happen at your spouse, when they do things that just irk your nerves. And I think God designs it that way where, I'm a pretty low-key person, but like Mylena knows the right buttons to like push to like set me off. And it's like, in those moments, am I going to truly show patience? Am I going to show grace? Am I going to love her? And same for her. Like, I know I push her buttons. I don't want to make this seem like a one-sided thing. And in those moments, she, has to truly love me as Christ, loved. And so coming from that is important, because if not, then Keith said something that was just so profound, where he's like, my examples of marriage was from TV. And that's what you see, where it's like, as real as it is, it's like, dang, that's kind of like, I hate to say this, pitiful, where it's like our examples of marriage are coming from TV, especially, us in, the African American community, where it's just such a little representation of what a family unit is, when it's like, no, that can't be your basis. Those are some great, the Cosby's or whatever you want to look at it and say, man, that was, great relationship, but that, if that's your standard, then that's not going to sustain you. Right. It's got to be what Christ has done for us to sustain us. But like I said, I definitely thoroughly enjoyed having this conversation with you guys. But I have one last question, because as someone who has a daughter and has a lot of female friends, I know how important that relationship is with the daughter and her father. What advice could you guys give me as I, raise a woman?
That's a great question.
Go to her events, support her.
Go to her events.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I agree. Spend time with her, affirm her, make sure that she knows she's beautiful, make sure that she knows you love her, that you think she's beautiful. But I think those two things are major.
Cool. Now, did you guys have any questions for me or for each other or anything before we wrap up? Nope. Cool. All right. Well, like I said, I appreciate you guys coming through and having this conversation, and thank you, Keith, for challenging me and saying, hey, you shouldn't have a conversation about relationships without having ladies on the podcast. So again, thank you guys so much. Next month, I don't know what I'm gonna do. I want to have Jamel and Elder Lee come on and talk about fatherhood. So I think that would be dope. So Jamel just had a son, and Elder Lee's got like 15 kids or something like that. He's got a lot of kids. But just someone who, truly loves his family and provides and protects his family. Just wanted to have a conversation with them. So hopefully that can happen. But thank you guys for tuning in, and we are out. Peace.
Yo, my world don't stop when the beats commence. Said I'm climbing up this ladder just to get over this fence and run far, far away from the games people play. In this melancholy modern day music, Malay, touche. Pussycats with lives to spare that kick in your heart, nice as hell. Yeah, be aware, beware. I hate to see you less a liver or worse. Polar bear, winter time, catch the river. Now that's cold, and like that, now that's old. Didn't buy the last copy of this, now that's old. It's the pepper on your salt, my dudes, I grind it out. And the answer to the questions of life, I find it out with that stress.
All right, guys. Did any of the cameras go out?
I mean, when the thing came up, I just...
No, I mean like the battery.
Oh, no, this one's flashing now.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah, this one is too. But yeah, you got it.
Oh, man, got through all of that. Thank you, guys.
Great.
Yeah, great job. I was like,
That was
wow,
fun.
like, that was a good answer. That was a good answer.
I feel like I stumble, I feel like I stutter and say contradictory things sometimes.
Oh, don't worry about it. Like, you go back and you be like, why did I say that?
Right.
Like,
I probably want you to watch it for a while.
I know you hate just seeing yourself on camera.
Because I was like, that first response was like, dang, like, I just like stopped. And I was like, I like in my head, I had like all these other things I wanted to say. I was like, I don't know if that makes sense what I said. Oh, wow.
Nah, you're fine. You're fine.
Thanks for having us
Thank you
and
guys
trusting
for-
us to be on your podcast.
Yeah.
No, absolutely, absolutely. So like I said, the thing about having like a guest-based podcast is like logistics. That's probably the hardest part because I want to, and then asking people too, especially because I don't want it just to be guys on. I want to have diversity of just genders and just people. I even want to have people who don't share my worldview on.
I was gonna ask you, have you considered asking people who are not believers
Yeah.
to come and
So I want to have
dialogue?
my coworkers come on.
Okay.
So I want them, but they're tricky because one says that she's, gave her life to Christ. So if she is saved, she's very in the infant stage. And then one, she would probably consider herself a Christian, but she grew up where her father was like a deacon. So she like knows all like
She knows the
Christianese
church, yeah.
stuff, but she's like, I'm just kind of burnt out of church. But
Yeah.
we've been able to build a good relationship and stuff. So I wanted to have them on as well, and I even want to have like Tam and Benita on because Benita actually works at the same job as I do. I know
I
I have.
didn't know that.
You didn't know that? Yeah. So she works in a completely different department, and I hardly go in, so I hardly ever see her.
Trips.
Yeah, I know.
But,
Like, girl, take me with you.
I know, yeah. And so you see all
I
these
can't afford
things.
it, but
And so I'm like just amazed, but both of them create content, so I wanted to have a conversation about like creating content. 'Cause I know Tam has a blog, and Benita wrote a book.
Pat would be good to talk to too.
I want to, so
Especially for content.
I hit up Pat because we have something in common. Because I've always been, I don't want to say intimidated by Pat, but I feel like me and Pat
I would
have
get
a
that.
lot of similarities because we're both from New York, and just from my vantage point, I can feel like sometimes I'm not approachable. And sometimes I get that vibe from Pat, but I hit him up and hopefully we'll get together and chop it up. But I do want to have Pat on the podcast too, so I'm trying to build that relationship because that's the other thing too. Is like
approach him slowly.
yeah. So wanting to
He's
like
one of my best friends.
just,
That's how you do it.
jump in, but just try to build relationships with people so that they'll be comfortable. Because that's my big thing. I want to make sure that you're comfortable. To have especially a conversation like this, I want to make sure that you're comfortable because I think me and Tam would be a good person, but I don't know Benita that much, so I want to make sure that she's comfortable.
I think she would be.
But yeah, so I've got a whole bunch of ideas and
Cool.
stuff. So I am super appreciative for you guys coming through. And like I said, I want to give other people platforms. So even though you feel nervous, it's just you. Just giving you guys just that opportunity just to share your thoughts and opinions without like someone like criticizing your thoughts and opinions. Just to have your own
Until later.
thought and opinion. No, well, once the people look at
Once
it.
it's on the internet.
Well, I mean, just within us, because I think that's probably the most beneficial thing, just the conversation that we have, and building more rapport with each other and learning more about each other. 'Cause, yeah, I didn't know you were the third of three sisters. I had no idea. So Mylena is the oldest of three sisters.
That would be interesting. I mean, yeah, if y'all talked about that. I don't know if you have.
About
Like your perspectives being the youngest.
and you guys are so far apart too.
yes, it's been what like the mom, little sister's daughter thing. I think like slowly but surely they're starting to realize I am an adult.
And a doctor.
I know.
So
And then your parents, and not to, say how old they are, but I'm assuming they
Yeah,
were
they're
a lot
older.
older when they had you.
Yeah, Dad was 49, Mom was 37.
When they had you.
Mm-hmm.
So as you've gotten older, they're like, you know.
He's like 70 something. I'm 20. I'll be 28 this year. 28 plus 49. Seven.
Yeah,
Seven.
That's how like my grandparents are. So they probably thought, hey, what's your granddaughter doing here? Like they think.
And that burns my dad.
So much.
Yeah, it's happened several times too.
Like people think my mother's my sister.
And then some people think
She
like
probably loves that.
Yeah, she hates it.
Really?
Mom,
She doesn't like it.
my mom is like his daughter or something, and that burns him.
Yeah, no, my father is I think 16 years older than my mother. And so they'll be like, oh, you're here with your daughter? And so I was like, yeah, I know that pisses him off.
Wow. My parents are only 1 year apart, but my dad looks way older than my mom.
Who's older, your mother or your father?
My dad.
Oh, so
Yeah,
Eileen is
older.
older than me, so that's always fun.
Yeah.